In 1969, humanity attempted something impossible. Not a simulation, not a theory, a real journey, nearly 400,000 kilometers away from Earth. At the height of the Cold War, while the world watched in disbelief, NASA prepared to send human beings to another world. And somehow, they made it back alive. But to understand how Apollo 11 reached the moon, we first need to understand why America became desperate to get there in the first place. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Union was winning the space race. First satellite, first animal in space, first human in orbit. Each Soviet success sent shockwaves through the United States. This was no longer just about science. It became a battle for technological dominance, political power, and the future itself. Then, President John F. Kennedy made a promise that sounded almost impossible.
Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
At the time, humanity had barely left Earth's atmosphere. And yet, America announced it would send humans to the moon before the decade ended. What followed became one of the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. NASA began building the Apollo program, a mission so complex that thousands of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and astronauts worked on it for years. At the center of the mission stood the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket humanity had ever built. Standing over 110 meters tall, Saturn V was taller than the Statue of Liberty. And during launch, it burned through nearly 20 tons of fuel every single second. Saturn V carried enough power to escape Earth's gravity entirely. But reaching the moon was only half the problem. The real challenge was surviving the journey. Space is not designed for human life. No oxygen, no atmospheric pressure, extreme radiation, temperatures swinging from deadly heat to freezing darkness. Even the spacesuits were not simply clothing. They were portable life support systems. Without them, an astronaut would die within seconds. But before humanity ever reached the moon, tragedy struck. In 1967, during a launch rehearsal test, a fire broke out inside the Apollo 1 command module. All 3 astronauts on board were killed. The disaster shocked NASA. And for a moment, the dream of reaching the moon seemed impossible. But Apollo continued, because by then, the mission had become larger than politics. It had become humanity's attempt to reach beyond Earth itself. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched from Kennedy Space Center. Inside the spacecraft were 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Their destination, the moon, nearly 384,000 kilometers away from Earth. The journey would take around 3 days. And as Earth slowly disappeared behind them, the astronauts entered an environment no human had ever truly experienced before. Silence, isolation, endless darkness. Outside the spacecraft, space itself remained completely silent. No air, no sound, no rescue. Only vacuum. Every movement, every calculation, every burn of the spacecraft's engines had to be almost perfect. One major failure, and the crew would never return home. Then came the most dangerous moment of the mission, the lunar landing. As the Eagle module descended toward the moon's surface, fuel levels dropped dangerously low. Warnings began appearing inside the cockpit. Back on Earth, Mission Control watched in silence. Then finally, Neil Armstrong spoke the words that changed history forever.
Right. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're
We're going to be busy for a minute.
Armstrong is on the moon.
Yeah,
Neil
they're off the
Armstrong,
limb now.
38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one.
Hours later, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of another world. For the first time in human history, a person stood on the moon. The surface was silent, lifeless, covered in dust untouched for billions of years. Above them, Earth appeared small and distant, a fragile blue world, floating alone in darkness. The moon was nothing like science fiction imagined. No atmosphere, no wind, no sound. In direct sunlight, temperatures could exceed 120 degrees Celsius. In darkness, they could drop below negative 130. Even walking became difficult under the moon's weaker gravity. Every movement kicked ancient lunar dust into the air. And beyond the thin protection of their suits, space itself remained deadly. But reaching the moon was never the final goal. The astronauts still had to return home. Apollo 11 lifted off from the lunar surface, reconnected with the command module, and began the long journey back to Earth. Then came re-entry. As the capsule slammed into Earth's atmosphere, temperatures outside rose to extreme levels. Finally, on July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 landed safely in the Pacific Ocean. Humanity had done the impossible. In less than a single decade, humanity went from barely reaching orbit to walking on another world. And yet, decades later, the moon still feels strangely distant, because Apollo was never just about technology. It was proof that humans could leave Earth itself. And maybe that's why the mission still fascinates people today. Not only because it happened, but because it still feels impossible. Because somehow, humanity reached the moon with technology that now feels almost ancient. More than 50 years later, Apollo 11 remains one of humanity's greatest achievements. But even decades later, the mission still feels almost unbelievable. But before you go, what part of the Apollo mission feels most unbelievable to you? The technology? The distance? Or the fact that humans accomplished this in 1969? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and discuss them with you in the comments. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable stories are the real ones.